Some of the dysfunction in boards that I see in the startup community are the founders' faults, and it happens in two ways. As a board and a leadership team, we said it doesn't matter what the VC is saying. We're going to stay in New York till we get to 10 million in recurring revenue. When we get to 10 million, we've earned the right to go to our next market. And some VCs didn't want to invest in that. They missed out. If you're going to create something great, there's going to be pressure involved. So if you're going to start a company and get it to a good outcome or eventually take it public, you're not just in the 1%.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to FinTech Leaders, coming to you from New York City. I'm your host, Miguel Armaza. I'm a co-founder of Gilgamesh Ventures, a venture capital fund that backs early-stage FinTech entrepreneurs in the US and Latin America. If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows so more people can learn about FinTech leaders. In this episode, I sit down with Mike Seckler, CEO of Justworks, one of the largest platforms for SMBs, providing HR, tax, and payroll services in the US and around the world. Founded in 2012 in New York City, Justworks recently crossed over $300 million in annual revenue and is backed by some of the best New York-based VCs, including Bain Capital Ventures, FirstMark, Thrive Capital, Union Square Ventures, Index, and Redpoint. We recorded this conversation live in the heart of New York City at Barclays Rise as part of New York Fintech Week. And I can tell you, Mike was outstanding, and he delighted a room full of 100 FinTech entrepreneurs and builders. I'm sure you will be delighted as well. First of all, thanks to everyone for coming. I know it's not quite after work hours, so I appreciate everyone being here. My name is Miguel Armaza. I mainly spend my time both investing in early stage FinTech companies across the Americas through Gilgamesh Ventures and podcasting, which honestly has changed my life. I really enjoy learning all these inspiring stories of the companies and people like Mike. And so I'm also very encouraged to see this great crowd of builders, aspiring builders, and just people who want to be part of the community. And special thanks, of course, to Barclays Rise and the whole team. So, Mike, when we spoke in the past, you told me that you did not train to be a FinTech CEO.
It's true.
Were you trained to be a geologist?
Yeah, this degree in college came quite in handy with the earthquake this past week because I became the resident expert on all this going on. I majored in geology. My summers were working on the Appalachian Trail. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. And then we graduated from college, and I thought I was going to go to graduate school in the sciences, but did kind of a master's level honors thesis that got to present at U.S. Geological Society of America, meetings, and began to realize there was a real politics to science that turned me off. And so instead of going to graduate school, I thought I should just get a job, but I had no business experience. But I crunched a lot of numbers, built models and things like that. And so I got a job at a management consulting firm as a research analyst and did that for about 18 months before founding my first company.
Which was in the 90s, right?
Yeah, we started that first company. I was 22. It was 1996, and it was the first SaaS business in HR technology.
Could you feel the boom that was coming in the 90s, eventually the dotcom boom and bust?
Yeah, what was interesting about that time was going to college, graduated in 1994. We were using the internet, we were using email, and then we graduated and got into the business community, and people weren't using the internet yet. It was fascinating. It was like a superpower to understand these things. And the boom really started in 97, 98. So we kind of preceded it, although there was something in the air when Netscape went public. I don't know if you know Netscape, but they were the first web browser in I think it was like August of 1995. And that's right about when my co-founder and I were talking about business ideas and beginning to build on the idea that became what was then known as Employees, Employee EASE. Company we started in 96 and, full of big dreams. And then the dot-com boom happened and we were in magazines and capital was easy. And then we had the very formative experience of surviving the dot-com bust, which we did so successfully, but I wouldn't wish that on anyone because it was very, very traumatic, I would say, in some ways. But we built a very profitable, fast-growing business that in 2006 we sold to ADP, which is the 800-pound gorilla in our space, and it's now known there as Workforce Now. So it's the largest part of that $100 billion market cap company. In fact, someone we hired out of college, our director of engineering, is now like the chief product officer at ADP. So it's pretty cool.
Mike, we just lived a similar experience as the dot-com bust in 2022 as the market completely turned. Tell us, we have founders in the room, as you know, we have people who maybe are going to go out to build in a very different environment than 2+ years ago. How do you compare the two and what helped you make it through? Because the mortality rate for the dot-com bust was very high.
Yeah, I mean, as hard as the past couple of years have been, I would say that the dot-com bust was a different, much more significant event. The way I experienced it was I was in my 20s. The only thing we had gotten was positive feedback because we started right before the dot-com boom and then it took off and capital was easy and everyone wanted to work with us. And, we got lots of customers. A lot of those customers were technology companies. And when you make money on a per employee per month basis and you're getting all these companies and they're all hiring, you have these massive tailwinds, and everything flipped in 2000, 2001. The way that we survived that was, unlike a lot of other founders at the time, we were honest with ourselves. Like, we didn't pretend like it was just going to get better. And we started making decisions. So we never got in a situation where our board had to make decisions for us. We started to reduce costs. We had to reduce the size of our team by about a third, and ultimately take a round of financing that was at 1/3 of our prior round to survive it. But we got through that period and then got everyone to an incredible outcome and a transformative outcome for the people that invested in 2002 when we needed it. We had a round of financing done at a materially higher valuation, so lower than our prior round, but not as painful as the one we had to take. And we had a term sheet supposed to be funded, and September 11th happened, and the investors stopped returning our calls and then said, you're gonna have to sue us, we're not gonna fund the money. So then we had to start again. So that was the kind of thing that we lived through. But I will say that while I would never wish that experience on anyone, because that experience, just to be clear what it was, it's like oxygen is in this room, you don't think about it. But if oxygen started getting sucked out of this room, there would be nothing in your life that you would think about other than how you get oxygen right now. And that's how it felt with capital at the time. It was very scary. And while I wouldn't wish that on myself or anyone again, the benefit, I think I would have missed a lot if I hadn't had the opportunity to lead through that. Like, if I'd only led through 96, 99, sold the company, it might have been a better financial outcome, but I would have missed the opportunity to learn what it really takes to run a business, which is a business eventually needs to be able to generate cash. And having to do that faster than we wanted, but learning how to do that was something I really now value and I think makes me a better leader today.
So you've been in this space where Justworks operates for decades, but tell us how you got involved with the company in the first place.
Yeah, well, to be clear, so I had my first chapter was 96 to 06, and I stayed at ADP for 2 years. So that was in this space. But then after 12 years of venture-backed life, and my co-founder and I looked at each other and said, man, let's start a business where we don't have to raise any money from anyone. We can own it, generate cash. And we did that, and we started a business. It was very different, named Euclidean Technologies. It's a systematic investment firm that starting in 08, uses machine learning and AI to invest in the public markets. That business still exists, and it's a great business. But what happened for me was, after a couple of years of really liking that, having a much better lifestyle than running a more traditional software company, I started to feel real emptiness. And the emptiness was twofold. One was not personally feeling like a lot of meaning in the work. Like my co-founder, John, hands on keyboard, he's always the beautiful mind, like the builder who I would build the business around. He still loves Euclidean. He's running Euclidean. But for me, I didn't feel as much meaning in that as like it Justworks. We're helping small businesses grow with confidence, and hopefully we'll talk more about that. I find it deeply meaningful. So I was missing that. But the other thing, what I realized is that I needed a break for sure, but the meaning for me in work comes from leading teams and being with large groups of people and how to motivate and align. And in a small investment firm where you're making decisions with machines as opposed to humans, you don't get to use that muscle. So the way I got introduced to Justworks is I was like losing my mind a little bit, and but I was in the community, and I got introduced to the founder of Justworks when the company had 20 employees and 300 grand in revenue and ARR. And we just started hitting it off. I wasn't like looking for board seats or angel investments. I was just looking for energy. And I found it, and we started spending time together, and over 6 months, we got to know each other. And then at the time, the board was just the founder, Isaac Oates, and Will Gabrick, who at Thrive is now at Stripe. And they wanted an independent board member, and they invited me to do that. And so I joined the board in 2015, served on the board for 4.5 years. And then the company was it was having a lot of success, but I was also starting to have some scale problems. And it was a great opportunity, and I came in to help run the business about 4.5 years ago.
I'm curious, you spent many years on the board. I'm sure you've been on other boards. Tell us what makes a successful board. This is a topic that has come up in some past episodes, but I'm curious to hear your take.
Yeah, so I've had my own boards previously, and I've been on some boards and was on the board at Justworks, and then left the board to come in as chief operating officer and went back on as CEO. I've seen a lot of pretty dysfunctional boards. Justworks is a very functional board, and some of the dysfunction in boards that I see in the startup community are the founders' faults, and it happens in two ways. It happens first off when founders, they optimize to valuation as opposed to like the individual or the firm that they want to work with. And then you end up with some misalignment. So you have people that own a lot of the business wanting something out of the business that's different from what you want. That creates a very difficult environment. And then the second is that a lot of founders who are great leaders of their teams don't think to apply those same principles to their boards, because it's like this weird perceived power dynamic where they think, well, the board members or investors are in all these boards. They're going to tell us what to do. But then a vacuum's filled, and then investors fill it, and no one likes that. So I think the best boards, and Justworks board is the opposite of this, are run with great intention. So our board is Isaac, the founder, myself. We have 4 independents and 2 investors on the board. Each of those independents was specifically chosen. Those investors at their particular rounds, they weren't like the highest valuation deals. They were the individuals who most aligned with what the company wanted to do. And then as we run board meetings, we send out very detailed materials a week in advance. The expectation is that board members have read those materials, so we don't never flip through a deck. And then what we do is we sit down. I'm super clear around what I want to get out of the board of the meeting. And then we also then go around robin, board one idea at a time until we exhaust it, just writing on the board from after reviewing the materials what each board member wants to talk about. Once we get everything on the board, then we form an agenda based on those items on the fly. And we have an open agenda that we populate that way. And then we always have a presentation, typically something that was brought up in the prior board meeting that just needed a little bit more preparation to go deep in. And we run our meetings that way. We also do an annual offsite with our board, which is something I had never done prior to doing that at Justworks. And it fosters a level of camaraderie and deep understanding that makes, I think, the board much more productive. And as CEO, makes it something I get energy from. A lot of CEOs don't get energy from their boards, and that's a shame because they can be architected that way.
It's a good point, the one that you bring about not just selecting the investor who's giving you the highest valuation, but someone who's going to be accretive to the business that you can work with. I think founders should always remember that.
Yeah, I'll build on that. I mean, I'll say like over time being in the startup community, I have a mental model or a term I use when I get to know founders and I understand where they're at. It's the self-inflicted wound quotient. And there's very common ways that, and I say this because I had some of these myself for sure in my first venture. We can talk about them. But like when you think about like co-founder relationships or first investor relationships or even first customers, early employees, like it's not like the same as like who you get married to in life, but there's some things that resemble it because you get married to someone great in life that, wants the same things out of life that you want, it can be pretty invigorating. And if you get married to someone you're attracted to, but you have a lot of misalignment, life can be pretty hard. Same thing with a bad co-founder relationship, misaligned investor, customer that offers to pay a lot of money but wants you to build something different than what your vision was, but you kind of do it for the capital, and then all of a sudden for the rest of your 10 years, like you're just following this thread that wasn't why you started the business. This stuff happens over and over. And so the intentionality around who you surround yourself with and mission, vision, values, these things, you read about it in a book, everyone's like, yeah, obviously, but like the discipline that the best founders bring to those things is next level. And a lot of times you see that in founders that are like on their third venture because they had to learn the painful lessons twice to know how much time to put in those things. So I just share that. For those of you who are thinking about going out for the first time, I made a lot of these mistakes, and hopefully maybe this can help you take an extra second as you think about some of these very critical elements of how you get going.
What was maybe the most painful mistake from your past ventures?
Well, the first venture, I was 22, and John Alberg and I were co-founders across these two businesses. We had been college friends, and we were getting going, but we found two other people who were a lot older than us and knew a lot about the space we were in. We didn't know a whole lot about HR technology. We just had first experiences as employees, and we're like, man, this is broken. How many times you fill out that form, and what did it take for you to get onboarded? And so we could see that the internet would make these things better. But we didn't totally trust ourselves, so we actually teamed up with two other individuals, and we had 4 founders. And I got a bunch of stories about this, but long story short, one of them was gone inside of 3 months. That wasn't that painful. But the other one was gone in about 2 years, and there were lawyers involved, and it was like a chunk of equity like left. It was really distracting, really painful. And we survived it, but would have been better if we had not had that self-inflicted wound, for sure.
A clean cap table is important.
Yeah, and 100% of your energy going to taking care of your customers as opposed to paying for past misdeeds is also, if you're trying to own a space, you have a lot of people competing against that you're competing for, like the brass ring you're going for. And if you got 30% of your energy just paying down past debt for bad decisions and 70% going after customers, and you're competing against someone who's putting 100% of their energy to innovation and customers, odds are not in your favor.
So you were involved, you mentioned, since the company had 300K ARR. It's a journey to get to 1 million, right? But a lot of people think about it that way. Then there's a different journey to get to 10, and then a different one to get to 100 and then beyond. Maybe share, I know you were not CEO back then, but still you were involved. Share how the company thought about crossing those milestones.
Sure. I mean, there's 3 that come to mind. 2 are more recent. One was when I came in the company, we were about 80 million and things were breaking. And one's now is we're transforming from a single product to a multi-product company. But the one that when I was on the board that is most vivid was the company started to get traction, had 1 to 2 million in revenue. I had joined the board, and the company was thinking about its next round of financing, raising the next VC round. And the feedback from the investment community was, because Justworks began really as New York City focused company, hey, you got to prove that you can do this in other markets. And so you're not going to be able to raise money until you're in other markets. And the leadership team was struggling with this because they didn't feel like they were ready, but they were getting all this messaging that they had to go faster into other markets so people could. And as a leadership team, they weren't comfortable with it. As a board, I'm really proud that we did this together, because one of the hard lessons I learned was not being focused enough in my go-to-market efforts early on in my first venture. We tried to do a lot of things at once. We had to pay the price for that and eventually get focused to be successful. So as a board and a leadership team, we said it doesn't matter what the VC is saying. We're going to stay in New York till we get to 10 million in recurring revenue. When we get to 10 million, we've earned the right to go to our next market. And some VCs didn't want to invest in that. They missed out. But some people saw the logic of what we were doing.
Do you think 10 million was enough?
No, it was great. I think we nailed that one. That was exactly right. We were ready at that point. We just had enough capacity within our team to take on something new. And by staying in New York, being focused longer, we still had work to do, just even for our existing customers. Like you get started, these adoption curves, you get the early adopters, but they're not necessarily representative of much of the market. So you'll get these early customers, they'll tell you how great you are, If you think, well, great, now I'm going to go do my next thing and take that for granted, you're going to have a bad wake-up call when you realize 85% of the market is going to want something more than those earliest adopters. So staying focused for a little bit longer than you might think to start delighting customers further up that adoption curve before you add a lot of complexity to your business, I think is like worth considering. It was certainly the right answer for Justworks. At least history suggests perhaps it was right.
So maybe tell us a bit more about your customers. If you think about the early adopters versus the ones you're serving today, you know, I'm sure a lot has changed. Maybe some of it has stayed the same. Maybe talk a little bit about your customers.
Yeah, well, you know, so it's interesting. So Justworks now, so trailing 12 months, we've done over 300 million in revenue. So we're a bigger business now. We've gotten to this point doing one thing for one type of customer in the US. We've been offering a tech-forward PEO solution to generally white-collar businesses in the United States. And we've gotten to some measure of success. But even at this stage, right, you look at our opportunity in the US alone, right, there's 40 million people working at companies with less than 100 employees. Globally, obviously, there's a lot more than that. So we barely scratched the surface, given that our mission is to help small businesses grow with confidence. And so we're in the midst of a transformation right now. Single product to multi-product, US-centric to global, white-collar focused to multi-vertical. And we're doing all these things at once so that we can bring our value proposition and productively serve a broader set of small businesses. And so like when to focus and when to take the next step isn't just like at 1 million and 10 million. At 300 million, we're having the same thing. It's just a different magnitude.
But now you're expanding multi-product. And part of this expansion has been partially, at least through acquisition, right?
Well, correct. I mean, so as it relates to international, we, 10 years ago, working with very small businesses, having international capabilities wasn't at the top of the list. And that's been trending, that's been changing over time. It was accelerated with the pandemic. So what happened with the pandemic were two things as it relates to our business. When companies went more hybrid or remote, there was this massive tailwind that emerged for our business because when you had people that were predominantly in one or two states, when they went and all of a sudden a 15-person company instead of 2 states was in 6 states, that multi-state compliance is overwhelming, particularly if you get someone in California. I mean, firing someone in California, I mean, you don't want to be doing that without a partner, right? So people distributed, and that became a big demand driver for our business. But at the same time, that dispersion didn't stop at the boundaries of the United States. So all of a sudden, you had all these companies having contractors or full-time employees in other countries at a much higher rate. So we were catching on to this, and we were building our own capabilities. We were interested in getting there faster, and we looked at all the different EOR providers, and we concluded, well, some had raised money at such crazy valuations, there'd be no real opportunity to do anything. But a lot of them, lots of shortcuts, you know, lots of like pounding their chest, we're in 150 countries, but complying to none of them, you know, that kind of stuff. And so we thought that we had to build this ourselves to have it at Justworks caliber. And so we were doing that. And then I was at a conference last year, and everyone I talked to was unhappy with their EOR providers. And then I talked to Martin, who's the founder of Mundi in Brooklyn. And I'm talking to Martin, he's telling me he's got employees in Argentina and Colombia and Mexico. I'm like, man, how do you manage that? He goes, it's, you know. And I go, this sounds really hard. He goes, it's not hard. So why not? He goes, because I have the best partner. He's the first person I've heard say anything good about their international employment providers. And he tells me about this company, Via. And I got introduced to these two founders, these two women from Mexico who started this business 6 years in. One of whom worked with you at Citigroup, I believe. It's here. And got to know them, and they shared our values. They shared our values about being capital efficient, about going deep and taking deep care of customers. They had gone slow to go fast. They'd really been intentional about their growth. And so we got to know them, and the deal process went from essentially Memorial Day to Labor Day, and they became part of Justworks then. So that is accelerated. So now with Justworks, we help our customers pay people in over 100 countries, employ people in kind of a single unified platform, and we'll soon be the dozen top countries that our customers are employing people in, and we'll be adding countries as we go.
Another kind of interesting fact about that story I didn't know about, we are investors in Mundi. So
well, we owe Martin a lot. He sent a note to this CEO thing about wanting help with CS, and I was like, Martin, I want to connect you with everyone on my CS team, and any ever time you need a favor, like you have a bank, but the VF founders, like these two women built their company the right way. They just, it's so deep and substantive. Their employee population so like fundamentally like committed to their mission. It was just like such a unique opportunity. And the reason why they were excited to become part of Justworks is they saw all this craziness in their space with people burning $10-20 million a month. And they're like, we can't even imagine doing that. Like, we want to build a real business, and we have these folks that are spending money like crazy. They felt like they had to attach themselves to a bigger platform. And so it was really fortunate for us because they've definitely probably accelerated where we are with international by 18 to 24 months.
And staying on the topic of M&A, what have you learned about post-merger integration?
Well, can I actually tell you a story that leads up to that? Because like people think about like the merger and the integration, but I want to tell you something that, and it relates actually to something that my co-founder and I did with a second venture. But something with Maite and Itzi was we were having this conversation. It felt great, but this is going to be a big thing for us. And so we flew out to London because one of them had just moved to London to build out their European operations, even though they started in Mexico City. And we all did an exercise. So my head of strategy, the person running our organically built international efforts, myself, and then Maite and Itzi, and then my chief of staff facilitated this. But we all wrote a memo, and the memo was like, what's our vision for employment for small businesses, internationally? How would we see this integration coming together, including who would report to who? And if we do this deal, if we do this, we come together and it doesn't work out, why wouldn't it come out? Like write that, like imagine that failure. And we all wrote those and we shared those, and it led to a very vulnerable, open conversation about what each of our motivations were and what we wanted, and allowed us to kind of have those conversations around, okay, like we're 80% aligned, but 20% we're not. So let's just talk about that up front. How much do you care about that? I really care about this. You really care about that? Okay. So by having those conversations up front, we could have high confidence that then with the integration, we weren't going to have these self-inflicted wounds of being like waking up one day and being like, wait a second, I thought we were doing it this way. I thought it was doing it this way, and that's where you see a lot of these things fall apart. That exercise is something I picked up. I built part of that first company in Atlanta, and I was in an entrepreneurs group, and I learned about this visioning exercise that was really powerful for me because I had this co-founder for the first business, essentially a 10-year run. Then I stayed on at ADP for 2 years, and he left to go begin working on Euclidean. And then when he got something going, we were talking about teaming up again with Euclidean. And we did the same exercise. Despite being best men at each other's weddings, business partners for 12 years, we did the same exercise. Essentially, like, where do you want to be with what do you want out of this business? What do you want out of your life? Everything about, how we're going to approach things. And we wrote it separately and we compared it. And even though we knew each other really well, there were things that came out of that we were not totally aligned on. And we worked through those things up front. So I think for sure, if you are meeting someone at a meetup and you think you're meeting your co-founder, and you don't have even 10 years of history, like it might be even more valuable to have those super open conversations up front to make sure that, you're going to be rowing in the same direction.
Part of what you're saying is avoiding surprises, right? And speaking on staying on the topic of values and culture, maybe how do you ensure that a company with how many employees?
About 1,500.
1,500 employees, how do you ensure that not just everyone's rowing in the same direction, but they're doing it with a set of values, kind of like the Justworks way?
Well, there's a couple of things to that. I mean, I think mission, vision, values, doing it early and then having them infuse everything that you do, like it just becomes self-perpetuating. Justworks has certain cultural elements that everyone looks for when they're hiring, and when they see certain behaviors, everyone knows that's not how we do things. So it kind of self-polices in a way. And we could talk about that. But, I think at any stage, thinking about your operating system for your business is important. It becomes critical as you grow when you can't just navigate things just by looking at everyone in a room. And, the operating system involves when you do planning and how you set budgets and how you take the strategic plan and break it down into here's the 5 things we got to get done, and who owns item 1, who owns item 2, and then what are the components that build up to that. And so there's an architecture and a cadence for revisiting that and reporting out on it that all great businesses have some version on, and there's no one right way to do that, but I think you have to be super intentional about it.
And on your team, something we talked about before was, diamonds are created under pressure. I think that's your geologist background speaking.
That is true, that diamonds are created under pressure.
How do you know how much to push when it comes to people? How do you find out where the line is?
Yeah, that's a good question. Listen, here's the way I think about this, is that if you're going to create something great, there's going to be pressure involved. So if you're going to start a company and get it to a good outcome or eventually take it public, you're not just in the 1%. And so a lot of people are trying to do these things, and you're going to have to be extraordinary to have great outcomes. So to think that you're going to do that in a way without ever feeling pressure is false. So part of how we create an environment that makes that pressure feel more sustainable or whatever is, and this is part of what I was struggling with in my second business, that we definitely have at Justworks is, or we don't have that challenge, because at Justworks, we really focus on the meaning of what we're doing. We look at our mission is to help small businesses grow with confidence. We think about what small businesses are doing and entrepreneurs is the most incredible thing. You have this vision, something you care about, and you put it all on the line to defy the odds and make your dream a reality. And then literally out of thin air, you create jobs for people that give meaning to their lives. It's the most important thing. But small business owners have not historically had great partners, at least in our space. Because why? Well, small businesses are hard to reach. You don't make much money in any one small business. Any given small business is more likely to go out of business than a big company. So everyone gravitates up market. So we're focused on helping small business grow with confidence. That's our mission. And the vision of our business, the way we want to leave the world better in the future from having been a part of it, is we want to make starting, running, and joining a small business a more accessible option for all. And in that statement, that explicitly acknowledges that for certain groups of people, access to capital and mentors and all the things that you need to be successful have been not equally distributed. And so Justworks wants to change that. So the folks at our company there's a lot of intrinsic motivation that comes from that. So we emphasize that and we try to nurture that. The other thing that I think allows for working under pressure at sustained levels is particularly, across our company, but certainly if you look at our leadership team, we're looking for individuals that want that experience of going after something really hard where success is not certain, and then you figure it out as a team. It's the best thing ever. When you go after something and you come out on top as a team. And so we talk about that, and that gives a lot of meaning to what we do, and it sustains us through periods that are challenging, for sure.
Speaking of challenging periods, you mentioned a couple times already that Justworks at some point a few years ago encountered some challenges as part of getting to a growth company. Would love if you could share a little bit more about that.
Well, sure. So I've been on the board for 4.5 years, and then in 2019, when the company was about 80 million revenue business, everything kind of started to break. And a bunch of things to that. You can scale functions for a while on the things I said before, just customer love and grit, and people hold the thing together and it keeps growing. And then eventually people just can't do it anymore. And you need structure and data, and you need to have the pieces in place to scale. Well, at 80 million, it became clear the parts of our business that were not set up for scale, and everything started to break at once. And then we had a big flood in the office, so we had to go remote for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we came back, and the pandemic happened. And then we had, June of 2020, and BLM and social justice, explosion. And it was very challenging time to be growing the company. But we got through that by staying focused on each other and our relationships, and by staying focused on our customers. And in some ways, that moment was actually where things could have gone south for Justworks, or we could have graduated to the next year. And the way we graduated was in that pandemic period, small businesses everywhere were really struggling. And things like PPP loans and employee retention tax credits, shared work programs, all these things where the government was bringing all these things to the table to help small businesses, but accessing these things was non-trivial. And most of these things were accessible through payroll. And so our team, it was pressure, all-nighters, like getting that stuff operational. So you could click a button and all that data, we would just get you access to those credits. Now, it's obviously been harder than that, but it was some of our company's best moments in terms of rallying as a company to show up for our customers when they needed us most, at their most vulnerable moment. And in that moment, we realized just how good we could be, because we were playing then at a higher level than we had been playing. And we carried forward that energy, and that really has fueled us over these last couple of years to where we are now, to where we now have the confidence to start doing some more things for customers.
Any interesting insights on your customers, especially pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? Maybe what are you seeing? Because you really have the pulse of SMBs in the US. Yeah, we have the pulse, like I said, on white-collar SMBs, because other verticals like manufacturing and so forth and real estate, like these are newer for us. But when you look at our customer base, it's like 75%, white-collar, tech, adjacent. And what we saw was really interesting was that first phase of the pandemic, everybody stopped hiring. Some people made some cuts, but then the hiring came back like crazy, like at a rate that hadn't been seen pre-pandemic. And then in July of 22, that stopped as, the NASDAQ kind of corrected a bit. And so, and VC dollars started to slow. In July of 22, all of a sudden, our customer base in aggregate began reducing the size of their teams on average. Some stopped hiring, but also then others, with layoffs. That has remained that way up until fairly recently. And then just about now, we're seeing kind of that bottom out and turn the other direction. But I mean, it's not like it's going back to a super hot hiring environment, but it does feel like it's stabilized for a while, and now it's turning somewhat favorably, which is important for us. I mean, we make money on a per employee per month basis. So when our customers are reducing the size of their teams, it's a headwind for us. When our customers are expanding, it's a tailwind. I've lived through these cycles before, and but that's kind of how we see things in these right now. So for the next question, I'm going to take a quick poll from the audience, just by show of hands. How many founders in the room? Wow. Oh, congratulations. That's awesome. An amazing number. And how many non-current founders aspire to one day build a company? Awesome. I mean, it's definitely over 50% of the audience. That's so cool. Summary. I mean, many of them will go out and try to raise capital. I'm sure others will try to bootstrap, but the raising capital is often essential for a business. How do you think, about fundraising? Maybe tell us about your different experiences and journeys you've had raising capital. Well, first of all, I just want to say it's so cool, and so many founders, inspiring founders are in the room. I think it's certainly been an enriching part of my life, and I encourage you all to go for it. Certainly, to the extent Justworks can help you all, sign up to do it. A little commercial. No, seriously. I mean, you are the folks we want to be serving, and we're solely focused on you. As it relates to raising capital, I would just say that when you're starting a business, storytelling and sales skills are essential for getting customers, for getting people to join you. Like you want talent, right? That could be working for anybody, and they're going to choose to leave that higher paying job with all the benefits to come work on, sawhorses and, plywood, because they believe in you and your vision. You got to be able to sell that. Well, that same thing is how you raise money. You have to tell an inspiring story about how the world's going to be different because of what you're going to build in your company. And you got to find people that are excited about it. And you got to be resilient because, you can talk. I mean, Bezos got 50 no's before he got the best, or I don't know if he's the most successful founder. 50 people said no. So you might expect to get 50 no's before you get a yes. So it's both the storytelling, but also that resilience. And that resilience, you got to think about where it's going to come from. So when I meet founders who, were at a bar last weekend and they have this great idea for their next startup, I just don't believe they're going to be successful, right? But when you meet someone who has had this life journey, and then they tell the story about these things in their life, and you can just see how it connects to everything that they ever thought about, and you walk away from the meeting thinking, oh my gosh, not only is that idea interesting, but I can't imagine anyone but this person starting this company because it's so authentic to them. That's when I think they may well have a chance of success. Because when you're building something with that is so intrinsic to you, number one, you may well have an insight that's really interesting as opposed to late night beer conversation
how likely that going to be interesting. But the other is like, these things are so hard. Like you're going to get kicked in the face, you're going to fall down, you're going to have people let you down. It's not going to play out the way you want over and over and over. And to be successful, you're going to have to endure all that and keep going. I got, there's like famous quotes on this, like Jobs, famous quote on this is, before he passed, said, increasingly convinced that what separates successful entrepreneurs from unsuccessful ones, increasingly convinced that at least half of it is just pure resilience, that they didn't give up. But I got a story about this, if I got time. Can I tell it?
Absolutely.
So my first business, so we're raising capital. I'm like, this is 1997 now, so I'm like, whatever, turning, 24-ish. And it was really cool. We were Bill Gurley's first venture investment, who's now pretty famous. Bill wasn't famous then. Bill had left being an analyst, and he wasn't yet at Benchmark. He was at Hummer Winblad. Hummer Winblad is not well known anymore, but it was like the first venture firm that invested solely in software companies. Way back in the day when people thought software companies were uninvestable because they had no assets. Okay, I'm not that old, but I guess I'm old. So Hummer Winblad was fascinating. And Ann Winblad was this woman in tech she's still around, she's fascinating, less active nowadays, but she started an accounting software company in the 70s that she sold in the late 70s for like $20 million, and she was 100% owner of it. So it's a lot of money now, but like in the 70s, it's like, and so she dated Bill Gates for like 7 years. Everyone thought they were going to get married. After Bill was with Melinda, Bill and Ann still went on annual retreats, I think, to like read books. I don't know. That's just the story I've told. I don't know if that's true. But Ann and Bill was fascinating. So they wanted to invest. We were done. They wanted to invest. And we were at dinner at a place called Il Vagabondo that closed, I think in 2016. It was an Italian restaurant, had an internal, bocce course. I thought it was so cool. New York City. And I wasn't living in New York City at the time. And realized that they want to invest. And so all of a sudden the tables had turned. Now they were hoping, they wanted to like make sure we took their term sheet, that we didn't shop it around. And so it was our opportunity just to ask questions. And Bill was, is very interesting. But Ann had seen a lot of things. I said, so Ann, you've seen all these entrepreneurs. You've been around forever. You've seen all these entrepreneurs. What's it take to be successful? And she told this story about, well, you see people do it different ways. You have like, folks that if you question anything about their vision, they'll punch you in the nose, never talk to you again, like Larry Ellison. And you have people that are really good about surrounding themselves with people that disagree with them and foster an environment like that, like Michael Dell. Said, but across that spectrum, they all have one thing in common. So I'm like sitting there, the edge of my seat, like my meatball. Like, what you gonna say? He says, what they all have in common is that they can believe fully in a vision. Like they just know that the world's gonna play out this way. And then they take a couple steps, and then they realize like 80% of how they thought it was gonna play out was wrong. But they take the 20% that remains and they recast their vision. And then they do that over and over. And I remember her saying, she goes, so successful entrepreneurs may have to do that 12 to 15 times across their venture. And I remember thinking I was hearing something really wise. And then as time went on, I was like, man, she was like, that was the wisest thing I'd ever heard, and dubbed that Ann Winblad's concept of intellectual stamina. But it relates again to this thing that this stuff is so hard that, and these ventures take like 10 years. My first two ventures I was in for 10, 12 years each. And, I've been involved with Justworks for about 10 years, although inside the company for 4.5. I think it'll probably be another 10, 12 year venture. If you're going to spend 10 or 12 years of your life on something, you better like make sure you love it, because it's a lot of your life. And if you're competing against someone who loves it and you don't love it, you're just doing it for mercenary reasons, like, are you going to be successful? Odds are less, right? But if you're doing it, it doesn't even feel like work because it's like your personal mission in life to make this business work, you're going to be pretty hard to compete against. So really encourage you to think hard about, if you're going to start a business, what exactly you're going to do.
That was amazing. Mike, we're going to take some questions from the audience while people kind of start thinking about what they're going to ask you. Are there any books that you've recommended the most over the years, one or two?
Yeah, sure. The Entrepreneur Journey, the best entrepreneur book I think I've read is Shoe Dog. I think it just captures, I think it took like 10 years before they were even like not living like paycheck to paycheck. And it gives a sense of like some of what we're talking about. Our whole team is reading Unreasonable Hospitality. Obviously it's about restaurants, but it's so relevant to like, if you want customers to feel love and to a point where they like tell mean, you got to do something pretty exceptional for people to tell their friends about like their HR provider, their payroll provider. And so like we want to show up that way for customers. So, our whole CS team is reading that. And then the last thing, yes for two, but it's just this thing I was saying earlier. It's kind of out of favor now, but everyone, in my first generation in entrepreneurship, like late 90s, everyone read this book, Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. And this whole like adoption curve mindset's so critical. Like, early adopters, like 15% of the market, they behave differently than the early majority who are like open to using your product, but they want to see proof of other people using it before they will. And then you have the late majority who won't use it until like basically everyone around them's using it. And then the laggards who are never going to use it. It's such an important framework to understand, because if you go out and you just talk to 10 random prospects, you get 10 no's, you could think you don't have a good idea. But if you talk to people on this side of the curve, obviously you're going to get 10 no's. Likewise, if you talk over here, you get 10 yeses, you're going to think you're on the biggest idea ever. But you may be underestimating how hard it's going to be, because you're only talking to 15% of the market that's like predisposed to work with you, whereas 80% of the market, 85% of the market's going to want something a lot more. So that book, I just always go back to it, reference it all the time.
I think some people are ordering the books right now.
Great. There you go. Awesome.
All right. So
I should get a commission on that.
Great. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Hi, Mike. My name is Sean with Holistically. Really enjoyed hearing the growth from like one city focus to multi-city focus. Sounds like now to international.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's next? So like, how do you create these magic moments for these employees, and what are you thinking about?
Well, so that transformation from a single product to a multi-product company is a lot of what I'm thinking about. Because I mean, the company is going through a metamorphosis, and it has these various transformations all happening at once. I mean, serving predominantly white collar businesses to, companies with more complicated hourly workforces that need, in the US, Spanish language support, which we didn't historically offer on the PEO. We built our payroll offering natively to do that, but now we got to catch up with kind of where we began. So there's a lot of work to be done there. The payroll business, which is a lower cost offering for folks that aren't yet ready for the PEO, that's growing very quickly for us. 85% of small business owners kind of go with payroll solutions while PEO adoption is growing. By having those two things, we can help customers when they're ready to get started, but then when their needs evolve, we can graduate them to the PEO. So making that all product-led and very low friction. And then, aspiring to enable small businesses to have the flexibility to build and evolve their workforces anywhere in the world, and to change those choices as their business needs evolve. Like, there's still a lot of work to be done there. There are the next set of seedlings that we're planting that hopefully in 2 or 3 years will be part of our growth story then, as these kind of new things are still small relative to our core today, but I'm not yet ready to talk about them. But I appreciate you asking. But everything that we're doing, just to be clear, it's all about helping small business owners grow with confidence, and it's about giving them more power to choose how they build their workforce and power to change those choices as their business evolves. So everything we do is going to be in that zone.
I'm going to take you back to that question about the multi-product company.
Yeah.
I mean, the common wisdom is that, do one experiment at a time, but you're trying to kind of, have 3 or 4 different adjacent products, like different segments, different geographies and so on. So as a company, what kind of strategy are you thinking about to maximize your chances of success?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting. I was talking with a CEO of a company that's like where we want to be 8 years from now, who went on a single to multi-product journey, and he made that comment. He said, wow, that's awesome. We kind of did one thing at a time. I was like, oh, wow, maybe we're doing too much. These things are all like really natural adjacencies for us. And they're not like whole new products per se. I mean, international maybe looks a little bit like that, but a lot of these things leverage same infrastructure. Whether you're paying someone in a payroll product or a PEO offering, like getting payments and deducting taxes is the same kind of thing. When you're enrolling in benefits and deducting premiums and remitting it to carriers, kind of similar motion, even though you can do it in aggregate with PEO and payroll, you got to do each one off. So there's a lot of things that we can share and reuse. It's not like totally new businesses. But at the same time, like our business with 1,500 employees, I would say that we're operating without a lot of like slack. Like we are doing a lot of important things. It's requiring our best. People are definitely feeling some level of pressure, but we're executing really well. And on all of these new fronts, we have hundreds of customers, and these new things for us are growing triple digit, whereas our core business is growing less quickly than that. And but time will tell. I mean, we think we have the right amount of innovation going on. It is something that we've debated over time, which is how do we set those frameworks? Like how much resources to devote to the core, how much resources to devote to innovation. When Justworks was earlier, we tried to do some new things and we failed because anything we tried to do that was new, think of that like a Horizon 3 investment, we'd have a crisis and then the Horizon 1 need would steal from Horizon 3 and we wouldn't get the new thing going. So we got a little bit better at that by literally segmenting like people and budget and setting philosophies around, X percent of revenue goes to Horizon 3, the rest goes to running the business. You can compete for priority within Horizon 1. You can compete for priority across Horizon 3, but you don't steal across time horizons. And that way, we're always doing the most important things to take care of customers today and doing what we believe are the most important things to take care of customers tomorrow.
We'll take it from the front and we'll go back to the back.
Hi, I'm Wayne.
Hey, Wayne.
My question for you is, you're very intentional about targeting SMB, but as they scale, how do you stay focused on the same customer, or do you expand your customers?
I think this is such a critical question because what happens in B2B SaaS in general, and it certainly happens in HR tech, which is the space I know most well, is that there's a perception that you can follow them. And why wouldn't you want to follow them? Because you already have them. The challenge that happens over and over, though, as companies try to follow them, is that they fall into what I call the upmarket gravity trap. And you start building things to support these larger customers, and then your salespeople realize, well, I can go sell a company that's way larger than where we've been. I can go to President's Club on 2 deals instead of 20 deals. And so the whole gravity of the org just moves if you're not intentional about keeping it focused down market. And, spending time with folks at HubSpot, I think that's what Salesforce went up market. That created that opportunity for HubSpot. If Salesforce hadn't done that, I'm not sure HubSpot would have been able to still be an independent company. You've seen it in our space and so on. So long way of saying, we accept that at some size, hundreds of employees, folks will graduate, whether it's to Workforce Now, my old platform, or now at ADP, or whether it's Workday. We will stay focused down market. We think that is, no one else is focused there. We think we can build a huge business there. We think small businesses have the biggest needs. And you need to do things differently to serve them well. It has to be super simple, easy to use, easy to implement, low total cost ownership. You need to be as product-led as possible. And so it's a different set of muscles than when you're serving 1,000-person companies. You need enterprise sales force and, consultants to implement and configure and all that. So I do not think you can do both well.
Michael, I'm Becky from Alpha Campus. I'm your customer. So right now that AI is really a big thing for all kinds of tech platforms, right? Mm-hmm. And the questions that I ask your colleague right before this session, actually, I thought that could be easily done by AI, but I have to go through that with them through a phone call. So from your perspective, how do you foresee that? How will you utilize AI to boost the platform, your platform? That's my first question. The second question is that based on observation from you share with us, you are very analytical. You share with us a lot of analytics about your customers. That means that you're really careful about details. But at the same time, you are also very strategic minded. So as a CEO, I really want to know your methodology that how can you keep your eyes as you look at big things, but still.
Yeah, it's a great question. Those are two big questions. I mean, on AI, we're investing in AI across the business. There's lots of experimentation going on. The most mature use cases are around, customer success and operations. I'll give you 2 examples. One is, we provide we help customers access benefits. And so when an employee has a life event, like a baby or gets married, you can change enrollments. Well, to do that, you have to send in marriage certificate or birth certificate. It used to be a human that would have to look at that. We've trained models using machine learning and so on, where, a very high percentage of folks no longer, a human doesn't need to be involved. We can immediately, process that life event. And that reduces our operational burden, but also enables our customer, or that employee, the worksite employee at the company, to get what they want faster. So that's a win on both sides. On the CS side, on chat, we use AI, hundreds of thousands of interactions every year. Last year, there were about 200, calendar year 23, about 200,000 interactions where AI got involved, and over 50% were able to be resolved without any human escalation. And CSAT scores, so customer scores, have gone up. So it's not like we're putting a step in there that everyone gets frustrated by just to get to the human. In fact, they're getting their answers faster. To your point, if you can get an answer fast, you don't have to talk to a human, often that's preferable. But in our business, though, there are times when as a founder, like when you're worried about getting sued for the first time, or you're going through a difficult termination, or you have a difficult leave, like you want to talk to a human. So we always want to have that available. And so for us, the strategy is, and maybe we clearly have more room to go, automate more of the routine things so that our human support can be there when our customers and entrepreneurs really, really need someone to talk through things. As it relates to like staying high level and getting in the weeds, I mean, there's so much to talk about on that. I would just say like having some of those goal setting structures, operating cadences is a way to like cascade goals. And then there's like, accountability meetings, ways of staying on top of things. But then what I like to do is marry the data with the anecdote. So I take customer escalations periodically. I go out on calls. I have a personal KPI of meeting with one CEO a week and 10 a month. Some of these are people I can learn from or peers. Some of them are customers or prospects, just so that like I'm getting the anecdotes alongside with the data, because sometimes they match up, but sometimes they don't. And when they don't, that's when you know to ask a lot more questions.
Yeah, I think Bezos from Amazon recently said that when the data and the anecdotes conflict, the anecdotes are usually right.
He has said that.
Yeah.
There's probably some truth to that. I mean, like, listen, even this international thing that you asked about, like, I kind of knew we had to do it, and I saw the data, like, material percentage of our customers had some international requirement. But then I was at a gathering last year, and I was talking to all these customers, and I mean, here's the story, right? So me getting invited to a CEO event is like letting the fox in the hen house, because everyone in the startup community, I want to be our customer. And if they're not our customer, I want to like, why are you choosing this other, you can learn a lot. And so I asked my biz ops team, okay, here are all the attendees, tell me who's Justworks customer, how many employees they have. And I go in, I see this woman, Lynette from FloodMap. I'm like, Lynette, and she sees me, Mike from Justworks. I'm like, I'm so excited to see you. She says, I'm excited to see you. Like, I say, congratulations on getting to 4 employees. That's a big deal. And she looks at me funny. She goes, I don't have 4 employees. I have 40. And I thought, oh, the spreadsheet must have dropped to 0. But then we realized she has 4 employees in the US. Those are the only employees on Justworks. And she has people in Australia, UK, and Canada. And then we laughed off my ignorance. And then she went on to say, but she would really love if Justworks could help her everywhere, because she's had a good experience with us and she had challenges elsewhere. Experiences like that made me realize, like, holy smokes, I got a massive opportunity and a massive risk if we don't get really good at international. Because the risk is, if she got confident that someone else could be an all-in-one solution for her, how long does she keep those 4 employees with Justworks? Probably not very long. On the other side, if we could help her in Australia, Canada, and the UK, which we can do now, by the way, and she's now moving her international employees to us a year later, that's like helps her, but also is much more revenue for us, right? So I needed to see those anecdotes to get the conviction. I needed to do the VIA deal. I never would have done it based on spreadsheet data. I needed to like feel the pain and the opportunity by talking to customers.
First of all, thank you. You have a great name. I'm also Mike.
All right. Hey, Mike. Probably only 2 of us like that in this room, right?
But no, really, really great stuff. I'm curious, I really like the way that you present yourself as an HR partner, right? Because I think that's important. What do you see, like what criteria is important for you for other partners, that whether it's Justworks or just in general, whether it's a technology partner, what's like really important for you? How do you kind of factor in the most important things to decide to partner with the company?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think in all areas of life, like working with people that share your values makes life more fun and easier. Don't have to think so much. I sense it. Like when I walk into an office of a startup or a company, you can smell the culture a little bit. And I'm really attracted to missionary cultures versus mercenary cultures. I want to be around people that I know deeply care about what they're doing. It makes me feel more comfortable. It makes me feel easier at trusting that if anything's ever in the gray zone, they're just going to default to what's right for me as a customer. And I want to be like, when we're on the other side, when we're a partner, I want our customers to feel that. So that's somehow how I think about it. But yeah, like, I don't know, I've had relationships that are opposite of that. And, sometimes you maintain them because they're like, they're good enough. But certainly we would be open to switching if I felt like someone was deeply taking the time to understand our needs and innovating on our behalf. So I think those folks are at risk. Sometimes there aren't better options in terms of like our vendors.
Yeah, I gotta say, I also brought on Justworks in 2017. Had a great experience. I felt that true partnership element, similar to what she was saying. Was able to pick up a phone, get some really good intel on like just difficult decisions. So
Wow.
you guys built a good culture. Congrats and keep it up.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That means a lot. Thank you.
We promise we didn't plant this wonders.
Exactly. Throwing out the referral checks.
I think we have time for like one or two more questions. So let's start with you, and then we'll go in back.
You talked about the kind of business model in terms of a classic SaaS model, pay per seats. And then we talked about the impact of AI and customer service and augmentation of human services. We're growing quite rapidly. We're about 20 people. We do a lot more with 20 people than was possible a few years ago. And you see this model evolving around this.
Well, that's super interesting. So this has been a trend over time. So when I started my first company in 96, there was no AWS. There were no commercial web servers. We had to go around with like disks in our bag to get companies on the internet so they could use our platform. I mean, it was the frontier or whatever. It was like, but then, then over time, AWS came, Gmail came, Salesforce came. You used to have to work with these crazy client server products for CRM that were very difficult for small businesses. So, and then, folks like Justworks have come that make it easier to, get started, right? So that infrastructure, I think it's only getting easier for small businesses to get off the ground. And certainly with AI, you're going to have companies that with 20 employees could do sometimes things that maybe you would have needed 100 employees before. And that, I think, is supportive of my thesis that like Justworks, we're just going to take care of smaller companies. We focus on acquiring companies when they have under 100 employees, and then some people stay with us till they have several hundred. When you get to 500, 1,000, your needs, you may want to go somewhere else. If you want to live inside our box, that's great, but we're not going to try to unnaturally keep you forever. So Justworks, we want to be part of that change. We want to be part of a revolution where small business owners, it becomes a more accessible option for all. And we think the world could positively change by helping to enable that. I think it's deeply meaningful. Thanks for asking that. Yeah.
Well, Mike, thanks for such a truly inspiring talk. I think everyone here is delighted they showed up. The podcast is great, but there's nothing like being here in person and being inspired by you. So thank you, Mike.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Mike Seckler, CEO of Justworks. If you want more interviews, make sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever you get your shows. It helps and means a lot. If you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, just drop me a line on Twitter or LinkedIn. Signing off till next week, I'm your host, Miguel Armaza.